apply the word. And it's my immense privilege this morning to introduce a guest to us as a church this morning, but a real close friend to myself. Jonathan and I met a couple of years ago when we started our master's seminary journey together, studying together for 3 years. And I found a friend that I never knew that I would discover, someone that has impacted my life deeply. Jonathan is one of these great guys that you get to meet him, and he's just full of life and smiles and energy and joy, and you kind of want to hang around with him because of that. And then the more you spend time with him, you realize, wow, there are deep wells of wisdom and love for God and love for people and things that I could learn from. One of the things that marks Jonathan is his humility. We both were in his dad's classes. He is our professor of relational discipleship and a few other things. And even though it was Jonathan's dad teaching the lessons, what I appreciate about him is his humility for the word. He never I've heard this before and it's just my dad. He carried the word and what the word said with such honor and the respect it's due and the weight it carries regardless of who's speaking about it. And so we have the immense joy, Jonathan, to have you with us today, with his wife, Steph, all the way from Vancouver in Canada. And he'll speak a little bit more about that. But I want you to not only open your hearts to an incredible human being that loves Jesus and preaches his word well, but as I said, with that same humility and honor for the word, to hear the word for what it is. So can we give Jonathan a shout of praise as he comes forward this morning?
Thank you for that intro. Guys, I must say, we feel so blessed being in South Africa. It's such a reason when we come here, it just feels like home. I should clarify, I don't know what the rules are, but it's still in her tummy till September, so we're not sure. Does this count? Is this her first one? Okay, it's her first one. Good. Yeah, good. I love that. Well, you guys are in the midst of a series called 10 Words to Live By on the 10 Commandments. If you want to impress your friends, you can use the word Decalogue for the 10 Commandments. And these are such foundational things. God chose to write one thing down, and it was these 10 words, and so we should probably pay some attention. And write down himself, I should say. All of Scripture is God-breathed and his word, but he did go to some extreme efforts to write these things down. So it seems like we should be paying attention. Now, the 10 Commandments, perhaps you already know this, they're stipulations of a covenant that God makes with his people. Covenant's a big word, and we're going to be talking about that today. And I used to think that the 10 Commandments were a list of do's and don'ts, mostly don'ts. It's like 1 do and 9 don'ts, I think. And I was a little bit confused by this in kids' church. It seems that God went through extreme lengths to pull millions of people out of slavery to nag them in the desert about things that he doesn't appreciate. And it seemed like a bit of a strange scenario. It's a lot of effort just to give some do's and don'ts. Like, these are the things I don't like. But I think there's a lot more going on here than the things God doesn't like. I want to read the setup to the 10 Commandments just briefly. This is in the chapter before. This is in Exodus 19. You'll see it on the screen. It says, "You yourselves have seen what I did to Egypt and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, then out of all the nations you will be my treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation." This is the context. Now, the goal here, you can see, is to restore some kind of love relationship between God and his people. That's what he's hoping for, seems like. And this verse almost reads like a cheesy Valentine's Day card in some ways, doesn't it? It's like, you will be, for out of all the earth, you will be for me a treasured possession, and I've carried you on eagle's wings to myself. It's very corny almost, but it's saturated. It's almost romantic, you could even say. In fact, scholars make a compelling case that this whole moment in Sinai, as all the people are standing before this mountain in this big dramatic scene, scholars have come to the conclusion that this is a lot like a wedding, what's going on here between God and his people. It would be a good metaphor to use for this whole scene, that God is trying to betroth, in some sense, his people. And you can see it all leading up to it too. He asked them to purify themselves like a bride would before the big moment, you know. And faithfulness language is riddled throughout this. God says, I've been faithful to you. I rescued you. I never forgot about you. Will you be faithful to me? And the people almost literally say, I do. You know, it's like all the Lord has said we will do, as the direct quote. It's very wedding-y and very it's covenant oriented. It's faithfulness oriented. Much more than, it's a lot deeper than just a list of do's and don'ts. So where the marriage analogy does break down a little bit is that you don't have to be married to be fully human. Jesus wasn't married and he was fully human. I hope we all agree on that. But Scripture argues that a covenant relationship with God is what it means to be fully human. And so there's where it starts to deviate. It's like reconciliation with God is like it's like our operating system. If you had a MacBook Pro with no 10.2.1 Sonoma on it or whatever the operating system is, what would you have? You'd have a charcuterie board or something. It wouldn't be able to do anything. And in the same way, it's like it's not an optional thing to be restored to this relationship. It was how we were created. It's what we were meant for. And so if we drill down on what it means to be fully human and how we're fully alive, I like to think about how everybody in this room, I think, has two core needs. I don't think we can get away from either of these two core needs. The first one is that we all want to be secure. And what I mean by that is we want to be loved and accepted and known for who we are. And there's a tremendous craving in our hearts for security and to be loved, yes? And then on the other side, we have this tremendous craving to be significant, another S. We've got security and we've got significance. And it's not just enough to be loved and know you're loved. I want to know that I have value and something to contribute and to be important. And I have significance, I have purpose, I have value. And so to be fully human is somehow recapturing this ultimate sense of security, of knowing that you're loved. And also that you matter and that there's a purpose to why you were created. We're always asking, am I secure? Am I significant? So the 10 words to live by are God's invitation for us to walk in this deep restoration that covenant relationship with him provides. And what we're going to look at, as you continue to look at it in your series, you're going to see how the covenant relationship God invites us into fully makes us secure, and it actually fully makes us significant as well. So it's worth leaning into. Today, we're going to look at how the second commandment does all this in particular. And it's do not make for yourselves God images. So, let's read Exodus 20, verses 4 to 6. You shall not make for yourself a carved image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water underneath the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them, for I, the Lord, your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of fathers on their children to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing steadfast love to thousands of those who love me and keep my commandments. So, the question we have to ask ourselves today is, why does the concept of not making God images, why is that so imperative for our faithfulness to him in this covenant relationship that he's invited us into? This is not a sermon on the terrible habit of wood carving. This has not much to do with that. What is it about the idea of making God images that interrupts so disastrously this idea of remaining faithful to the covenant? Let's look at this. So let's talk about what an idol actually is. It's probably a good place to start. A kind of a simple definition is that an idol is something that attempts to represent a god. It's a representation. I used to think that, ancient people weren't that smart and that they were worshiping carved things, and you kind of have that bias. Us modern people think we're so smart and we would never do things like that. But even in that day, people knew that those carved images that they were making, they knew they weren't gods. They were trying to represent something distant and unattainable, and so they needed to make something that was more present and local. And you can imagine that desire for us to have something we can see and touch. But they were always meant to be representations. In many ways, it's like a flag. Look at the South Africa flag. That's not South Africa, but you know what it stands for. And so a flag is a good metaphor for how idols would have been treated even then, even way back then. So Yahweh forbids this attempt to try to make a flag of him, to try to represent him. Why? It's interesting. Well, first, nothing can fully represent God without making him less of who he is. You just can't do it. We sang today about all that he is, and that, the things that we stand in awe of. Great song, by the way, guys. Well done. And how would you make a flag of that? How would you begin? I think the universe is the flag. I mean, how do you capture? And so God says, don't even try. Don't even try. And the second thing, not only could we not capture him, the second thing is that idols tend to end up getting the attention because they're tangible. So, even those carved images, that people would have made in their time to represent their God, and they know it's not really the God, they end up being worshipped because they're so just right there. And it's the tendency of humanity to go, I wanted things that are tangible and that I can control. It's just what we do. Now, things that are representations just wind up being worshipped. And if you remember the story, King Hezekiah, he had to actually destroy that thing that Moses made that has the serpent on it. Do you remember that story where Moses makes a serpent and statue thing, and then when the people looked on it, they were healed from their snake bite, poison wounds? You remember that story? King Hezekiah, hundreds and hundreds of years later, had to actually destroy that thing because the people started to worship it instead of God. It's like, don't go to the snake thing that, yeah, it worked once. I get that. I get that. But people go, hey, when we worship the snake thing, all our poisonous things go away. Let's just go worship that thing. And God's like, no, that was a one-time thing. And so you see the tendency that even Israel had to worship representations, things that God even commanded to be made. So the first commandment, if you remember from last week, is about worshiping God alone. And the second commandment then is about not worshiping a distorted version of that God. So it's like, yeah, worship God, great, got it. How do you know that the one that you're worshiping is not a distorted version or something you created? Or it's a very important next step, right? Yeah. Worship God. Next question would be, well, who is that guy? Let's not get that wrong. So, how do you know that you haven't made him up? How do you know that you haven't, who you're worshiping so faithfully is the real one? Is the one who he says he is? It's an important question to answer. I have a lot of friends, maybe you guys have heard this word, deconstruction. I have a lot of friends that are my age, millennials. It's their favorite thing to do, is deconstruct everything, about everything. And I can't tell you how many friends I've had that have walked away or rejected a God that doesn't actually exist. They made him up. Now, of course, there's painful experiences, there's real situations. I mean, I don't blame them for the image which they've wound up with. But they go, yeah, I don't follow that God. No way. Look what he did. Look who he is. Look at all these things. And when they tell me these things, I'm thinking in my head, I don't follow that God either. You're walking away from a figment of your imagination. Like, let's do some deeper work here. They're walking away from a mental concoction of who God is. Now, we have compassion because these are painful experiences carve our false images, probably chiefly. But, we have to have grace. But my heart goes out going, man, this is not who he is. It's not what he's like. I get that that's your perception, and I understand why even. But I think we should humble ourselves before the fact that, you don't get to decide who he is. And that's really good news. That's really good news. This is a silly example, but just to make my point. St. Nicholas is a real person. He really lived, right? The 11th century, 10th century. And he really did, give gifts to orphans. That's a real thing. But if you're waiting to validate St. Nicholas's historical existence by waiting at the bottom of your chimney, because your image of St. Nicholas is Santa Claus, you're going to be very disappointed. It's like, but he really was a real guy, and everybody's written off Santa Claus. And we should write off Santa Claus, but we created that. Our Coca-Cola created that. I don't know who did, but St. Nicholas was a real person. I'm sure he's very upset in heaven about how we don't even think he existed anymore. It's like, no, Santa Claus didn't exist, but St. Nicholas did. And if we're waiting for God at the bottom of the chimney, God's like, that's not who I am. That's not what I do. You made that up. And so it's very important that we know who he is. So here's the big question. How do we know who God really is? This is the question. You can put this on the screen. There it is. How do you know who God really is instead of who we imagine him to be? Now, buckle your seatbelts because this is a very profound answer. You ready? Next slide. He tells us. Write that down. Write that down. I know, I'm very profound. I did a lot of deep study. And how we find out who God is he tells us. Again, if you want a fancy word, like the Decalogue, you can use the term self-disclosure in your Bible study. Now, before the commandments, this is how God introduces himself to the people. Exodus 20, verse 2, he says, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt and the land of slavery. Basically, he said, hi, I'm the guy who rescued you. Remember that? That's me. I'm the one who didn't forget about you, and I'm the one who brought you into freedom and slavery. It's how he introduces himself. What an intro. Like, that was me. I'm that guy. And that's it. That should be our first impression of who he is the one who's rescued us. That's a beautiful intro. It comes before the Ten Commandments. It always says, hi, I'm the one who loves you forever. Now, Jesus comes along and I think is saying the exact same thing to us today. Hi, I'm the guy who rescued you. I'm the guy who went to extreme lengths and never forgot about you. And that's the beginning. That's the beginning. John 1:14, wow, what a profound verse. It says, the Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. The self-disclosure we find in Jesus is so compelling. He says, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. That's crazy, because what that means is that what we see in Jesus is what God is like. So who God is like is self-emptying, sacrificial love for our sake. Hi, I'm God. I'm the one who dies for those I love. Again, what an intro. And Jesus is the most profound form of self-disclosure that we have in all of Scripture, I think. We can say that. God incarnate, it's up there. Among his most dramatic forms of self-disclosure, it's probably the best one. And what does he do? Who does he reveal God to be? Sacrificial love. Incredible. This is where we have to begin. But just like the Israelites, we miss this so easily. You know, God just pulled them through a pretty hairy situation and out of a pretty desperate one as well. And yet they forget so quickly. The most ironic scene maybe in all of Scripture is the fact that God's writing, on the Mount Sinai, the Ten Commandments that says don't make idols, while his people are making one at the bottom of the mountain. That is irony. And listen, remember the quote? What they say when the golden calf is made? It says, behold, you are gods who have brought you out of Egypt. What? This brought you out of Egypt? Like they literally say, it's like, no, not Yahweh. Behold, your God who brought you out of Egypt. So offensive and so quick. So quick. So why? Why did they do this? You'll probably be able to feel yourself all through this. We're like, I do these same things. But let's focus on them for a second, because it's always fun picking on the Israelites. At Sinai, God shifts gears a bit from what's happened before. Some of the most exciting parts of the whole Bible is the beginning of Exodus, right? You got plagues, you've got seas parting, you got pillars of fire, you got all this crazy stuff. And then God shifts gears a bit and starts planning a wedding. And Moses, I guess, is his wedding planner. I don't know. That's what it kind of seems like. And they're just taking a while. You ever planned a wedding? It takes a while. And the people who have become accustomed to all these signs and wonders and pillars of fire, being rescued from danger. Now I have to sit for a minute and wait for the next part of his self-disclosure. And it's just different. I mean, I don't know. If I was them, I would have not anticipated a wedding in the desert. I would have been like, no, keep doing that. Can you keep doing that stuff that's really cool and amazing? That's what I would have thought God was like. I want him to be like that. I love that God. I love the God that rescues me, and it's dramatic and but now we're sitting here for a while, and where did this Moses guy go? Where did he go? They say that, right? Well, as for this Moses, we don't know what's become of him. And they're delayed. They're delayed. Make for us gods. So, with no clear timeline or fresh results, you guys ever been there with the Lord? No clear timeline, no fresh results. Been there. The people grew anxious in their desert. They grew a little anxious. Where was the God that I thought he was? Now they have to sit there a minute and wait for his self-disclosure. So, from their perspective, God has his priorities really messed up. We're still in a desert, are we not? Like, I have been to Mount Sinai. There's no water. There is no food. It's like Mars. It looks like Mars. I'm serious. Is that a helpful frame of reference for you? You guys have all been to Mars, right? So that's what Sinai's like. And it's arid. And so if you just park there for a second, anxiety is a really logical. Like I've got camelbacks, 2 camelbacks and a bandana, and the shorts that cut off with the zipper. They look stupid, but they're helpful. Like, I'm kitted out because it's an arid place. We have to prepare, and you just have to camp there for a while. So here's what idols do. Idols solve immediate felt needs. Every single time. Every single time. They solve immediate felt needs. The people wanted something. They wanted something immediate. Right? Like, man, I can imagine them saying, man, remember when God was just on it? Remember when he was just, I love that. I wonder where he went. We should make a God that's present and here. Like, that would make sense. In fact, that's kind of what he's like. So maybe we'll just even try to represent an aspect of who he is. I bet you they were trying to represent Yahweh, to be honest. They were probably trying their best. He was immediate and present. Maybe he's kind of like this, and they make him in their image. And they wanted something tangible. I love tangible stuff. Like, man, remember when God was just doing all those cool things we could see? Like, you remember when the walls of the Red Sea were hundreds of feet high on either side of us? Like, I miss that, God. I want tangible things. So they said, let's make a God that's immediate and tangible. Let's fashion our favorite parts about God into one. Let's fashion our favorite parts about him. And they find themselves in a desert, and they think that the immediate felt needs justify certain aspects of who God is, but God's doing something a little different. And it's taken a second, and that makes them anxious. So here's what I think is going on. God's self-disclosure now is beginning to require this wonderful thing called trust that they don't know about yet. They don't know about that very well yet. They've had a few moments, But now God's going, I'm trying to build something new in you. I'm trying to have you rely on something that's much, actually more important than my lickety-split Red Sea parting stuff, hard as that might be to imagine. That looked pretty handy for them. But he's going, no. That's nothing. I want a trust relationship with you. Like, I want you to know who I really am and how powerful I really am. And Red Sea parting is like, yeah, I know that was a fun one. But, trust, though. Trusting me in every way, in every moment. That's better. And I can imagine the Israelites going, I don't know. I don't know. So, has anyone in here ever felt like God was a little silent or distant? Or a little invisible? You ever found yourself saying things like, oh, God, you used to do this, Remember when you did that? I liked when you did that. And you can resonate with their anxiety, right? I can. You can resonate with wanting something more immediate and tangible in a moment. So, seems to me, outside of trusting in his self-disclosure, how he's choosing to reveal himself, seems to me that we've got two basic options. If you don't want to do that, if we don't want to trust and want to be more like the Israelites, it seems to me we have two basic options. First one is we can just abandon God entirely and worship other things. It's an option. You can just abandon ship and go, I don't know about that. Trust, that's just way too scary. And, right, it is. Trust is the scariest thing in the world. I remember when I was getting to know Steph, and we're just a few months into dating, and all of a sudden I'm realizing I'm trusting her more and more. And then this other little feeling crept in going, I'm giving you more and more power to absolutely destroy me. Like, I really care about you now, and I really trust you, and if you hurt me now, this could go really bad. And you know that feeling. As trust grows, your vulnerability grows at the same time, and you feel a little bit, you're vulnerable now. Trust is inherently vulnerability-inducing, isn't it? Like you're no longer finding salvation inside of yourselves or things you can control. Of course, love becomes really tricky when you don't trust anyone or anything. But there's a reason why it's like, that's so great about sin. That the results are going to be immediate and they're going to be tangible. Like if you're in a desert of, like, let's say, loneliness, things like pornography, promiscuity, immediate, tangible. Dopamine is extremely tangible. You know it. We all know it. And the desert of loneliness is gone for a second. And it's immediate and it's tangible. Now, there's zero trust required because we solve our own problems in whatever way that's available to us. And the Bible will call that idolatry. It's looking to other things for security and significance. You think about the desert of loneliness and the options that we have at our own disposal. They're short-term solutions, but you do feel loved for a second, and you do feel important for a second. Sin has short-term solutions, and there's a reason why we worship idols, because they work in the short term. So that's option one, is we can just go that way and abandon God entirely. But then there's this other option that I tend to prefer, actually, and it's sort of the religious church kid option. And I like to do what I think Israel was doing, is I like to fashion God himself into the kind of God I want him to be. That's harder to notice. It'll be harder for you guys to notice if I'm fashioning God in my imagination into the God that I want him to be. And I can go to church forever, no one will call me on it, because they're all going to be aspects of who God is. I'm not going to get it totally wrong. Of course, I'm not waiting for his self-disclosure. I don't actually trust him. But I'm going to pick aspects of who he is that suit me and my needs and the things that I want to go do. And you'll never notice. But I should be careful. They love songs these days. Maybe it's just the radio in Canada. I don't know. The songs that are being played, if I hear another song about how God's going to help me in my battle, and solve my problems, and when I couldn't see a way, you were already there. Like, all those songs that are, like, they're true. Like, they're true. But I have this little wonder in me when I hear, like, 7 songs in a row about how God's going to rescue me from my battles today. I'm like, yeah, God can do and has done those things, but to me, you sound anxious that your life might be a little hard, and that it's not going to work out the way that you want it to. That's a tricky line, because God does save, and he does know the future, and he has rescued me from all sorts of battles. But if it's just that over and over and over again, we have a sort of a Christianity where I come from, where if God's not lickety-split on rescuing me from my battles and my suffering, then is he who he says he is? Maybe I should deconstruct this whole thing, because it's not working out. And all the songs on the radio don't feel true in my life, and I'm waiting for St. Nicholas to come down the chimney. Like, I'm just, maybe he's doing something different. And that's really hard for us to wrap our heads around. So we make God in our own image. We don't trust him. You've made God in your own image. He's like, I'm doing this self-disclosure thing. I'm God after all. I think I can choose how I should reveal myself. And I think I know what I'm doing. And I'm up to something very intentional in you and in this world. Would you like to get on board with that? And that's pretty anxiety-inducing. And I don't blame us for creating all kinds of idols, both outside of him and of who he is. It's logical things to do. So here's our little statement we're going to work through with the rest of our time. When we trust God to let him reveal himself to us, we experience his intended outcomes. Does that make sense? When we trust him and when we wait for the wedding, when we wait for what he's doing, even in a desert, we get his outcomes. Now, what are those? The first one, very simple, to be loved. His desire and outcome is that you would be fully and completely loved by all that who he is. That's what covenant relationship is. You know the word for love in Hebrew? It's chesed. You got to clear your throat when you say it. The Afrikaans people would be great at that. Yeah. So, you know what chesed actually translates better to than love? A better translation is covenant faithfulness. Like, I made promises and I always keep them. You know, in English, I love you. It's like, ugh, English sucks. Hebrew's way better. Chesed. I've made promises and I will keep them. That's what it means to say I love you when God says it. That's so cool. So much deeper than I love you. So you can't have a love relationship with a figment of your imagination. That person doesn't exist. Love can only exist between two people, or beings, I guess. And you don't concoct something because there's no covenantal loyalty or love present between a figment of our imagination. Remember, that's the point of the 10 words, is I'm trying to restore you to love and community with me. And we can't have a covenant relationship with someone we don't trust. And so God invites us to express the same kind of covenantal loyalty that he shows to each of us. It's a beautiful invitation. So that's the first thing. First outcome is to be loved, to be made secure, fully secure. God himself says, I love you and will always. When you realize that in your heart of hearts, all the other things start to just fade. That's the first one. The second one is really fun. So that's the security part. What about significance? We don't just sit there and being loved all day long. You know, it's like, oh, I'm still loved again today. It's not quite complete. There's got to be something for us to do. And he created us for a reason, after all, and there's purpose. Even in the Garden of Eden, we find purpose. Like, I made you for a reason. You have value. So what is that? This is really fun. It's for us to be image bearers. That's our purpose. That's what he made us for. And he made us to be in relationship. That's probably the umbrella. But within that umbrella, it's like you get to bear my image. How much more important can you get? How much more value could you find in a human being than being an image bearer of the God we sang about earlier today? So one of the reasons he told us not to make images of him is because he already has. Isn't that interesting? Technically speaking, we're all idols. I know you all freaked out when I said that. But icon is the word in Greek. And we're made in God's image. So God says, don't create images of me. I already did that. That's my job. And I created representations of myself on earth. So we are the best he could do, in a sense. And he did pretty great. He made people capable of willful reciprocation of love. That's not a wood carving. That is an act of a divine being who created persons that he could be in relationship with. That's you and me. So he made living, breathing, relational beings imbued with dignity and value and personhood and the capacity for love. Now you'll know when you've assumed the role of being God of your own life is when you start to make idols. Because gods make idols. It's what gods do. God did it. He made icons. He made images of himself. And so you'll know when you've assumed the role of God in your life and you've decided to trust in yourself above everybody else, because what gods do, small g gods in our case, what small g gods do is they create things in their own image. Whether that's of God himself, if you're clever like me, or whether you're just doing whatever you want. We create things in our image, and oh, do they pale in comparison to the images that God created in you and I. So, what if instead of making images ourselves, we were, as Romans invites us to, be conformed to the image of Christ? Romans 8:28 says this, and we know that in all things, God, who works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. For those God foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son, that he might be the firstborn among many brothers and sisters. So my friends, we're terrible gods, but we're perfect idols, assuming who we are seeking to become like is Christ. And Romans tells us and begs us to be conformed to his image. And the journey of discipleship, you could say, is the journey of moving from being your own God to being an image bearer. To being an image bearer of Christ, that he might be the firstborn of many brothers and sisters like you and me. Now this is a miracle that he accomplishes in us, and we have to be very careful that we don't work towards becoming like Christ. We surrender to him and trust him and go, this is a work you got to do. And he comes and goes, great, I can help you with that. And we let him be God in our life. And you know what he does? As he takes over, as he's in control, he changes us. He transforms us, would be a right word, back into the kind of being that reflects who he is, which was the original design. One that is covenantally in relationship with God and reflects that to the world. Incredible. So our concluding statement is this. When God is worshipped according to his divine self-revelation, not according to our preferences or imagination, he accomplishes his purpose in us of experiencing the love of Christ that transforms us into his likeness. If that's too wordy for you, you can go with don't make idols, be one. Guys, who else is worth looking like? Who else is worth looking like? The best display the most powerful display of love we've ever witnessed on this earth. We're invited to represent that to the world. What a calling as a church. What a calling as a person to look like him. Who else is worth? I'm not worth looking like. You know, no offense, but neither are you. In comparison to who we're invited to look like. So, I'll ask you this question. Where is God inviting you to trust him in order to experience his outcomes? What is the deserts that you find yourself in that God is inviting you to trust his outcomes? And I promise you, it will complete your security and your significance in ways that idolatry never could. Worship team, you can come up. Let me pray for you guys. Father, I ask that you would give us the courage and the ability to humble ourselves before you now. And the deserts that we find ourselves in and the anxiety that riddles us when we don't understand what it is that you're up to. Father, I pray that in this place you would teach us about trust. And as we trust you, I pray that we would experience your covenantal loyalty to us. And would that transform us as our own gods. The God of self, most of all, is dethroned to let you accomplish your outcomes. They're so much better. The outcomes you had in mind at Sinai were so much more profound than the ones the Israelites were going after. And Lord, I admit that the outcomes I go after are pale in comparison to what you're up to. Build trust in us. Save us from ourselves. Salvation belongs to you. In Jesus' name, amen. Pierre.